The glare of the relentless Arizona sun cast long shadows across the dusty trail as Yates Jameson pulled his horse to an abrupt halt. His weathered face, bronzed from years under the open sky, narrowed with concern at the sight before him. A woman's body lay crumpled at the roadside, her dress torn and stained, her face hidden beneath a tangle of honey-brown hair. The year was 1876, and the territories were no place for a woman alone. Yates dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the hard, packed earth. He approached cautiously, one hand hovering near the Colt revolver at his hip, a habit born from a decade of vigilance in unforgiving lands. "Madam," he called, dropping to one knee beside her. The woman stirred feebly, her cracked lips parting as she tried to speak. Yates gently brushed the hair from her face, revealing delicate features marred by exhaustion and the harsh kiss of the desert sun. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. She reached out with a trembling hand, and Yates caught it in his own calloused palm. "Please," she whispered, her voice as dry as the surrounding landscape. Yates reached for his canteen and carefully tipped a small amount of water to her lips. "Easy now," he murmured. "You've made it far enough." The woman's eyes widened with both relief and fear before closing again as unconsciousness reclaimed her. Yates assessed the situation quickly. Night would fall soon, and with it, the predators, both animal and human, would emerge. He couldn't leave her here. With gentle efficiency, he lifted her onto his horse, noting how slight she felt in his arms. He mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest to prevent her from falling. "Let's get you somewhere safe," he said, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He clicked his tongue, and his faithful Appaloosa, Thunder, began moving at a steady pace toward Yates's homestead several miles away. As they rode, Yates studied what little he could see of his unexpected charge. Her hands, though dirty and scratched, showed no calluses of hard labor. Her dress, despite its current state, was of finer quality than most women in these parts could afford. She was clearly not from around here, and Yates couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to such desperate circumstances. His homestead came into view just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, set against the backdrop of red rock formations. It wasn't much, but it was his, earned through years of honest work after leaving his gunslinging days behind. He dismounted carefully, keeping one arm around the woman as he did so. Inside the cabin, he laid her gently on his bed, the only one in the single-room dwelling. He lit a lamp and examined her more closely in the warm glow. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with features that spoke of refinement and education. A small gold locket hung around her neck, the only jewelry she wore. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and though her skin was hot to the touch, she didn't seem to be suffering from severe heat stroke. Yates dampened a cloth and began to cool her face and neck, careful to maintain her modesty. As a bachelor who had spent most of his adult life in the company of other rough men, he felt distinctly out of his element caring for an injured woman. "Who are you?" he murmured. "And what in blazes were you doing out there alone?" As if responding to his question, the woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering open once more. Momentary confusion gave way to alarm as she registered her unfamiliar surroundings. "It's all right," Yates said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I found you collapsed by the road. You're safe now." She attempted to sit up but fell back with a groan. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice slightly stronger but still raspy. "My homestead, about 15 miles northeast of Silver Creek." He offered her water again, which she accepted gratefully. "My name's Yates, Yates Jameson. She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face as if assessing whether he was trustworthy. "Hope," she finally said. "Hope Reeves." "Miss Reeves," Yates acknowledged with a slight nod. "Care to tell me how you ended up half dead on the trail to nowhere?" Hope's hand moved instinctively to the locket at her neck. "I was traveling by stagecoach to Tucson. We were attacked." Her voice caught. "Bandits, They killed the driver and the guard, took everything of value from the passengers." Yates's jaw tightened. Stagecoach robberies weren't uncommon, but they rarely ended in bloodshed unless something went wrong. "And the other passengers?" he asked. "There was only one other, an elderly gentleman. They shot him when he tried to protect me." Tears welled in her eyes. I ran until I couldn't anymore." "The attack must have been at least 20 miles from where I found you," Yates said, impressed despite the grim circumstances. "Few men, let alone women in restrictive clothing, could cover such a distance on foot in this terrain." "I don't know how far I went," Hope admitted. "I just knew I had to get away. They wanted more than valuables from me." The implication was clear, and Yates felt a surge of anger toward men who would prey on a defenseless woman. He'd seen too much of that in his time. "You're safe now," he repeated, more firmly this time. "You can rest here until you're well enough to travel. Silver Creek isn't much, but there's a telegraph office. You can send word to your people in Tucson." Hope looked away. "I don't have people in Tucson. I was going there to take a position as a school teacher. They won't be expecting me for another week." Yates considered this new information. A woman traveling alone to a new town where she knew no one. It wasn't unheard of, but it was unusual and risky. "What about family elsewhere?" he asked. "Someone who'll be missing you." The shadow that passed over her face told him all he needed to know before she even spoke. "No, there's no one." Yates nodded, recognizing the look of someone truly alone in the world. It was a look he'd seen in his own reflection for many years. "Well, Miss Reeves, it seems you're stuck with me for the time being. I suggest you rest now. We can figure out next steps in the morning." To his surprise, she reached out and caught his wrist as he started to rise. "Thank you," she said simply, her green eyes sincere, "for finding me, for your kindness." Yates felt an unexpected warmth at her touch and her gratitude. "Just doing what anyone would," he said, though he knew that wasn't necessarily true in these parts. He set about making a pallet for himself near the fireplace, giving Hope privacy to sleep in his bed. As he settled down for the night, Yates found himself pondering the strange twist of fate that had brought this mysterious schoolteacher into his solitary life. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's small windows. Yates had risen early, as was his habit, to tend to the horses and check his small herd of cattle. When he returned to the cabin, he found Hope sitting up in bed, looking considerably more alert than the previous evening. "Good morning, Mr. Jameson," she said, smoothing her tangled hair with her hands. "I hope I haven't inconvenienced you too greatly." Yates set down the basket of eggs he'd collected from his small henhouse. "No inconvenience, Miss Reeves. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." She glanced down at her torn and dirty dress with evident dismay. "Though I'm afraid I'm hardly presentable." Yates rummaged through a trunk and produced a simple shirt and trousers. "These might swim on you, but they're clean. There's a screen in the corner you can change behind." "I'll step out and give you privacy." Hope accepted the clothes with a grateful smile. "You're very kind, Mr. Jameson." "Yates," he corrected her. "Nobody out here calls me Mr. Jameson except the bank manager, and that's usually when I'm behind on payments." This drew a small laugh from Hope, a pleasant sound that somehow brightened the humble cabin. When Yates returned after giving her time to change, he found her dressed in his clothes, the sleeves and pant legs rolled up multiple times. She'd managed to find a piece of rope to use as a belt, and had washed her face and combed through her hair with her fingers. Despite the ill-fitting attire, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that Yates found himself admiring. "I'm sorry I don't have anything more suitable," he said, setting about preparing a simple breakfast of eggs and leftover biscuits. "These are perfect under the circumstances," Hope assured him, moving to help with the meal preparation. "May I assist you? I feel useless just sitting there." They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Yates stealing occasional glances at his unexpected guest. In the daylight, he could see that her hair wasn't simply brown as he'd first thought, but a rich honey color with streaks of gold that caught the sunlight. The simple act of cooking breakfast with another person made his cabin feel warmer somehow, more like a home than merely a place to sleep. Over breakfast, Hope told him more about herself. She was 24, had trained as a teacher in Boston, and had come west seeking independence after the death of her parents 2 years prior. "My father was a professor at Harvard," she explained. "After he and mother died of influenza, I found myself suffocating in Boston. Everyone had expectations of me to marry well, to be content with a life of afternoon teas and charity committees. So you decided to teach children in one of the roughest territories instead." Yates couldn't keep the note of admiration from his voice. Hope smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "I wanted to go where I was needed, where I could build something of my own. The school board in Tucson was desperate enough for a qualified teacher that they didn't care I was unmarried." Yates nodded, understanding the desire for a fresh start all too well. "Bold move for a city woman," he observed. "Most who come out here have no idea what they're getting into." "I'm learning that," Hope admitted, glancing down at her bandaged hands, "though perhaps not in the way I anticipated." After breakfast, Yates outlined his plan. "I need to ride into Silver Creek for supplies today anyway. You can come along and send a telegram to the school board in Tucson. Let them know what happened and that you'll be delayed." "And then what?" Hope asked. "I've lost everything, my clothes, my teaching materials, what little money I had." Yates considered the problem. "Silver Creek's got a general store. Not much selection, but we can get you some basic necessities. As for getting to Tucson, there's another stagecoach that comes through in 3 days. I can see you safely onto it." Hope nodded, though Yates detected a hint of uncertainty in her expression. "That's very generous of you. I promise I'll find a way to repay your kindness once I'm established in Tucson." "No need for that," Yates said firmly. "Out here we help each other. It's the only way to survive." The ride to Silver Creek took just over an hour. Yates had given Hope his spare hat to protect her from the sun, and she rode behind him on Thunder, her arms hesitantly circling his waist. The feel of her holding on to him was distracting in ways Yates hadn't expected, and he found himself unusually aware of every movement, every slight adjustment she made to keep her balance. Silver Creek was hardly impressive, a dusty main street lined with a general store, saloon, small bank, telegraph office, and a handful of other businesses. Several residents stopped to stare at the sight of Yates riding in with a woman dressed in men's clothing. He felt Hope tense behind him at the attention. "Ignore them," he said over his shoulder. "Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something else to talk about by sundown." Their first stop was the telegraph office, where Hope composed a brief message to the Tucson School Board explaining her situation and assuring them she would arrive as soon as possible. Yates noticed how she downplayed the danger she'd been in, mentioning only a travel delay due to unforeseen circumstances. "They might withdraw the position if they think I'm trouble," she explained when he questioned her about it. Female teachers are expected to be models of propriety and good judgment. Getting robbed hardly reflects poorly on your character, Yates pointed out. Hope gave him a wry smile. You'd be surprised what reflects poorly on a woman's character, Mr. Jameson, I mean Yates. Their next stop was the sheriff's office, where Hope provided what details she could about the stagecoach robbery. Sheriff Miller, a gray-haired man with a perpetually tired expression, took notes with minimal interest. "Third robbery this month," he commented. "These gangs are getting bolder." "You're lucky to be alive, madam. Will you be sending a posse after them?" Hope asked. The sheriff gave her a look that bordered on patronizing. "With what men, madam? I've got one deputy and he's laid up with a broken leg. The territory marshal is in Phoenix, and by the time he gets here, that gang will be in Mexico." Yates saw the flash of indignation in Hope's eyes but squeezed her arm gently in warning. There was no point in antagonizing the only law for 50 miles. At the general store, they purchased the essentials Hope would need: a simple dress, undergarments, toiletries, and a pair of sturdy boots more practical than the city shoes she'd been wearing. Yates insisted on paying, waving away her protests. "You can repay me by teaching some of these local children to read properly," he said. "Most of them can barely write their names." As they were leaving the store, a burly man with a thick mustache stepped into their path. "Jameson," he greeted, his eyes sliding to Hope with undisguised interest. "Who's your friend, Harlan?" Yates acknowledged coolly. "This is Miss Reeves. She'll be heading to Tucson shortly." "Miss Reeves," Harlan tipped his hat, his smile failing to reach his eyes. "Unusual attire for a lady." Hope squared her shoulders. "Necessity often overrides convention, Mr. Harlan." The man chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "She's got spirit, Jameson. You should bring her to the saloon tonight. We're having a little poker game." "We'll be heading back to my place," Yates said firmly. "Miss Reeves needs her rest." Something ugly flashed in Harlan's eyes. "Since when do you turn down poker, Jameson? Time was you'd never miss a chance to clean us all out." "Times change," Yates replied evenly. "Good day, Harlan." As they walked away, Hope gave Yates a curious look. He seemed unpleasant. "Wade Harlan owns the saloon and thinks that makes him important," Yates explained, helping Hope mount Thunder. "Best to avoid him when possible." They made one final stop at the post office, where Yates collected his infrequent mail, a catalog from a St. Louis merchant, and a letter that he quickly tucked into his pocket without opening. The ride back to the homestead was quieter than the journey into town. Hope seemed lost in thought, and Yates respected her silence. The events of the past day would be enough to overwhelm anyone. As they approached his property, Yates found himself seeing it through fresh eyes: the weathered cabin with its sagging porch, the small barn that needed a new roof, the modest corral where 3 horses now grazed alongside Thunder. It wasn't much compared to what a Boston-educated woman would be accustomed to. "It's peaceful here," Hope said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "You've carved something honest out of the wilderness." The simple observation, delivered with genuine appreciation rather than the condescension he might have expected, caught Yates off guard. "It's a work in progress," he said. "Aren't we all?" Hope replied softly. That evening, after a simple supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Yates had given Hope his rocking chair, while he sat on an upturned crate, whittling a piece of pine wood with his pocket knife. "May I ask you something, Yates?" Hope ventured after a comfortable silence. "You can ask," he replied with a small smile. "Can't promise I'll answer. What brought you here? You don't strike me as someone who was born to ranching." Yates's hand stilled on the piece of wood. It was a fair question, but one that opened doors to parts of his past he rarely discussed. Still, there was something about Hope's direct gaze that made him want to be honest. "I was a different man once," he began slowly. "Rode with a rough crowd after the war, did things I'm not proud of." Hope didn't interrupt, just watched him with those clear green eyes that seemed to see more than he was comfortable revealing. "8 years ago, I was shot and left for dead by men I thought were my friends," he continued. "A Navajo medicine man found me and healed me. By the time I recovered, I'd had enough time to think about the path I was on, decided to try a different one." "So you became a rancher," Hope said. Yates nodded. "Worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny, bought this place 4 years ago. It's not much, but it's honest work." "That takes courage," Hope observed. "To change your life so completely." "Or desperation," Yates countered. "Perhaps both," Hope suggested. "In my experience, the two often go hand in hand." Yates studied her, recognizing that she too had made a desperate, courageous choice in leaving behind everything familiar to venture into the unknown. "Seems we have that in common, Miss Reeves." "Hope," she corrected him with a gentle smile. "If I'm to call you Yates, you should call me Hope." The next morning, Yates awoke to the unfamiliar sound of someone moving around his kitchen. For a moment, he was disoriented, his hand automatically reaching for the gun he kept nearby. Then he remembered his guest and relaxed. Hope had already stoked the fire and was preparing breakfast, her movements efficient despite her unfamiliarity with his cabin. She'd put on the new dress they'd purchased the day before, a simple blue calico that complemented her coloring far better than his old clothes had. "Good morning," she greeted him cheerfully. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to make myself useful." "Not at all," Yates replied, suddenly conscious of his rumpled appearance. He excused himself to wash up outside, splashing cold water on his face from the basin on the porch and running damp fingers through his dark hair. When he returned, Hope had set the table with a surprising touch of elegance, considering their limited resources. She'd even found a wildflower to place in an old jar as a centerpiece. "You didn't have to go to such trouble," Yates said, though he was touched by the gesture. "It's no trouble," Hope assured him. "Besides, I enjoy making things pleasant. Life has enough harshness without inviting it to breakfast." There was wisdom in her words that belied her relatively young age, and Yates found himself wondering again what hardships she might have faced beyond the loss of her parents. The way she spoke sometimes hinted at deeper wounds. After breakfast, Yates needed to mend a section of fence that had been damaged during a recent storm. To his surprise, Hope asked if she could accompany him. "I'll just be in the way here," she explained, "and I'd like to see more of your ranch." Yates wasn't accustomed to having company while he worked, but he found he didn't mind the idea. "It's hard work in the sun," he warned her. "I'm stronger than I look," Hope replied with a determined set to her chin that he was beginning to recognize. True to her word, Hope proved to be a capable helper, holding tools and even learning to hand him the right nails before he asked for them. She asked intelligent questions about ranching, genuinely interested in understanding the work that sustained his modest homestead. "How many cattle do you have?" she asked as they took a break in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. 27 head, Yates replied. "Not much compared to the big spreads, but enough to make a living. And you manage all this alone?" There was admiration in her voice. Yates shrugged. "Hire help when I need it for roundup or branding. Rest of the time, it's just me." "Don't you get lonely?" The question was asked softly, without presumption. Yates considered it honestly. "Used to think I preferred the solitude. Now I'm not so sure." He hadn't meant to be quite so candid, and quickly added, "Town's close enough when I need company." Hope nodded, seemingly understanding what he wasn't saying, that the kind of company available in a frontier town often left much to be desired. As they worked together throughout the day, Yates found himself opening up more than he had to anyone in years. Hope was an easy person to talk to, genuinely interested in his thoughts and experiences without judgment. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Boston, her teaching experiences, and her dreams for the future. "I want to build a school that teaches more than just reading and figures," she explained passionately. "Children out here need practical knowledge, agriculture, natural sciences, even basic medicine, things that will help them survive and thrive in this environment." "Sounds like Tucson is getting more than they bargained for in a school teacher," Yates observed with a smile. Hope laughed. "Perhaps. If they don't dismiss me as a radical bluestocking first." By late afternoon, the fence was mended, and they returned to the cabin tired but satisfied with their accomplishments. Hope insisted on cooking dinner, sending Yates to clean up while she prepared a surprisingly flavorful stew from the limited ingredients available. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Yates asked as he savored a particularly tender piece of beef. "Thought you grew up with servants in Boston." "We had a cook," Hope confirmed, "but after my mother died, I spent a lot of time in the kitchen with her. Mrs. O'Malley believed every woman should know how to prepare a proper meal, regardless of her station." Her expression softened with fond remembrance. "She said it was one of life's essential skills, like reading or swimming." "Wise woman," Yates commented. Hope nodded. "She taught me many things my formal education neglected. I suspect her lessons will prove more valuable out here than my knowledge of French literature." After dinner, they again found themselves on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. The night was cool but pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I've never seen so many stars," Hope said, her face upturned in wonder. "In Boston, the city lights obscure all but the brightest." "That's one thing we have plenty of out here," Yates replied. "Stars and space. It makes one feel rather small, doesn't it?" Hope mused, in a comforting way somehow. Yates understood exactly what she meant. The immensity of the night sky had often provided perspective when his troubles seemed overwhelming. There was something about the eternal dance of the stars that put human concerns in their proper place. As they sat in companionable silence, Hope suddenly shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Cold?" Yates asked. "We can go inside." "No, it's lovely out here." Hope hesitated, then admitted, "I was just thinking about tomorrow, about continuing to Tucson." Yates felt an unexpected pang at the reminder that she would be leaving. In the short time she'd been at his homestead, her presence had brightened spaces he hadn't even realized were shadowed. "Having second thoughts?" he asked carefully. Hope sighed. "Not exactly. I still want to teach. I still believe in what I came here to do. It's just..." "Just what?" Yates prompted when she didn't continue. "I'm afraid," she confessed quietly. "More than I was before. The attack, being alone in a strange town. It all seems more daunting now that I've experienced some of the reality of frontier life." Yates wanted to tell her she didn't have to go, that she could stay at his homestead as long as she wished. But he knew such an offer would be inappropriate and unfair, given their short acquaintance. "Fear's not always a bad thing," he said instead. "Keeps you alert. Makes you think twice before taking unnecessary risks." Hope considered this. "I suppose that's true. Still, I hate feeling this way. I've always prided myself on my independence." "Independence doesn't mean facing everything alone," Yates said, surprising himself with the insight. "Out here, the most independent folks are usually part of a community. They help each other when needed, stand together against common threats." "Is that what you have in Silver Creek, a community?" Hope asked. Yates shifted uncomfortably. "Not exactly. I keep to myself mostly." "Why?" The simple question held no judgment, just genuine curiosity. Yates was silent for a long moment. When you've lived the kind of life I have, you learn that people are quick to judge based on who you were, not who you're trying to be. Hope turned to face him fully. And who are you trying to be, Yates Jameson? The question caught him off guard with its directness. Just a man making an honest living, he said finally. Someone who doesn't have to look over his shoulder or sleep with one eye open. I think you're succeeding, Hope said softly. You saved my life. You've shown me nothing but kindness and respect. Those aren't the actions of someone with cause for shame. Her words touched something deep within him, a place that had been wounded for so long he'd almost forgotten it existed. You're generous in your assessment, he murmured. I'm observant, Hope countered, and I've met enough truly bad men to recognize a good one when I see him. There was something in her tone that made Yates wonder again about her past, but before he could ask, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. Storm's coming, he said, rising to his feet. Better get inside before it hits. They had just made it into the cabin when the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle shower had transformed into a deluge, rain pounding on the roof with almost deafening intensity. Does it always rain this hard? Hope asked, eyes wide as lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes. Desert storms are like desert people, Yates replied with a small smile. When they do something, they commit fully. The storm raged for hours, the wind howling around the cabin's corners and rain finding its way through small gaps in the roof. Yates placed buckets under the worst leaks, while Hope stoked the fire to combat the sudden chill that had descended. I'm sorry about the leaks, Yates said, embarrassed by the state of his home. Been meaning to fix that roof for months. It's charming, Hope insisted, and seemed to actually mean it. Like being in a ship during a squall, safe but aware of the elements. Her perspective was refreshing, finding beauty and adventure where others might see only discomfort and inconvenience. It was a quality Yates found increasingly attractive. They passed the evening playing cards by lamplight, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to their simple entertainment. Hope proved to be a formidable poker player, her expression giving away nothing as she consistently outmaneuvered Yates. Where did a Boston schoolteacher learn to play poker like that? He asked after she'd won her fourth consecutive hand. Hope's eyes twinkled with mischief. My father hosted a weekly game for his colleagues. I wasn't supposed to watch, of course, but I found ways to observe without being seen. Remind me never to underestimate you, Yates said with admiration. That would be wise, Hope agreed with a teasing smile that transformed her face, making her look younger and more carefree than he'd seen her thus far. The storm continued well into the night, and when it was time to retire, Yates again took his place on the pallet by the fire. The rain had cooled the air considerably, and he noticed Hope pulling the thin blanket more tightly around herself in the bed. Are you warm enough? He asked. Yes, thank you, she replied, though the slight tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Yates retrieved an extra blanket from his trunk and handed it to her. As she reached out to take it, their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected current of awareness between them. Thank you, Hope said again, her voice softer now. For everything. Get some rest, Yates replied gruffly, retreating to his pallet. Storm should pass by morning, but sleep eluded him long after Hope's breathing had evened out in slumber. The woman sleeping in his bed had somehow managed to disrupt his carefully ordered existence in ways both unsettling and exhilarating. Tomorrow, she would be preparing to continue her journey to Tucson, and his life would return to its solitary rhythm. The thought brought a hollow feeling he hadn't anticipated. Morning dawned clear and fresh, the desert air scrubbed clean by the night's storm. Yates rose early as usual and stepped outside to assess any damage. The barn roof had lost a few shingles, and one of the corral fence posts had been blown askew, but overall, his property had weathered the tempest well. When he returned to the cabin, he found Hope already awake and dressed, her hair neatly braided and pinned. She looked more composed than he'd seen her since their first meeting, though there was a certain tension in her movements that hadn't been there the day before. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Any serious damage from the storm?" "Nothing that can't be fixed," Yates replied, pouring himself a cup of the coffee she'd already prepared. "The stagecoach should arrive in Silver Creek this afternoon. We'll need to head into town after breakfast if you still plan to be on it." Hope nodded, though her expression was difficult to read. "Yes, of course. I should send another telegram to confirm my arrival in Tucson." They ate breakfast mostly in silence, the easy camaraderie of the previous day replaced by an unspoken awareness that their brief time together was coming to an end. As they rode toward town, Hope sitting behind Yates as she had before, he couldn't help but notice how naturally she now held onto him, how her body had learned to move with his and the horse's motions. It was a small thing, but it spoke of adaptation, of quick learning qualities that would serve her well in Tucson or anywhere else her path might lead. Silver Creek was more animated than it had been during their previous visit. The arrival of the stagecoach was always an event in such small communities, bringing mail, supplies, and occasionally new faces to the isolated settlement. They stopped first at the telegraph office, where Hope sent her message to Tucson. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Yates noticed Wade Harlan watching them from the entrance of the saloon across the street. There was something in the man's expression that put Yates on alert. "Let's check if the stage is running on schedule," he suggested, steering Hope toward the station with a protective hand at the small of her back. The station master confirmed that the stagecoach was expected around 2 o'clock, barring any delays from the previous night's storm. Hope purchased her ticket to Tucson with money Yates had insisted on lending her, promising to repay him as soon as she received her first month's salary. With several hours to wait, they decided to have lunch at the small hotel dining room, the only establishment in Silver Creek that served proper meals outside of the saloon. "Would you allow me to treat you to lunch?" Hope asked. "I know it's a drop in the bucket compared to all you've done for me, but I'd like to do something to express my gratitude." "You don't owe me anything," Yates began, but seeing the determination in her eyes, he relented. "But I won't turn down a good meal in pleasant company." The dining room was nearly empty, with only 2 other tables occupied, one by a traveling salesman, the other by the town's banker and his wife. They found a quiet corner table by the window, where they could observe the street while enjoying relative privacy. Their conversation over lunch flowed more easily than it had that morning, perhaps because both recognized these were their final hours together. Hope spoke of her plans for the Tucson school, while Yates shared stories of his early days learning to ranch from an irascible old cowhand named Jeremiah. "He sounds wonderful," Hope laughed after a particularly colorful anecdote. "Is he still around?" "Past 2 winters ago," Yates said, a hint of sadness creeping into his voice. "Tough old bird, but his heart finally gave out, left me his saddle and his recipe for rattlesnake stew." "Have you made it?" Hope asked, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Once," Yates admitted. "Wasn't half bad, but hunting rattlers for dinner seemed like more trouble than it was worth." Their laughter was interrupted by the entrance of Wade Harlan and 2 of his regular companions. Yates tensed immediately, noticing how Harlan's gaze locked onto Hope with unsettling intensity. "Jameson," Harlan called, sauntering over to their table uninvited. "Miss Reeves." Enjoying our fine dining establishment, we were, Yates replied pointedly. Harlan ignored the hint. Heard you're taking the stage to Tucson today, Miss Reeves. Shame. Silver Creek could use a woman of your quality. The way he emphasized the last word made it sound vulgar rather than complimentary. Hope's spine straightened, but she maintained her composure. I have a teaching position waiting in Tucson, Mr. Harlan, but thank you for the sentiment. Harlan leaned closer, placing his hands on their table. Teaching position, is it? Funny, I was talking to Sheriff Miller this morning. Seems he telegraphed the marshal about that stagecoach robbery you reported. Marshal wired back that there haven't been any registered stagecoach robberies on that route in over a month. Yates saw Hope pale slightly, but her voice remained steady. Perhaps they haven't been reported yet. The driver and guard were killed, as I told the sheriff. Or perhaps you're not being entirely truthful about who you are and what you're running from, Harlan suggested, his eyes gleaming with malice. Pretty women on their own often have interesting stories. Yates stood abruptly. That's enough, Harlan. Miss Reeves doesn't owe you or anyone else an explanation. Harlan straightened, his hand drifting toward the gun at his hip. Always the gentleman, aren't you, Jameson? Even after all these years, still playing the hero. The tension in the room was palpable. The other diners had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with wary interest. We're leaving, Yates said to Hope, never taking his eyes off Harlan. Our business here is concluded. Hope gathered her things with remarkable composure given the circumstances. As they moved to exit, Harlan stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, but his parting words carried a clear threat. Safe travels, Miss Reeves. Roads can be dangerous for a woman with secrets. Outside, Yates guided Hope swiftly down the boardwalk toward the stagecoach station. I don't like this, he said in a low voice. Harlan's taking too much interest in your situation. Do you think he knows something? Hope asked, glancing over her shoulder. I think he's fishing, but that doesn't make him any less dangerous. Yates considered their options. Maybe you should wait for the next stage. Come back to the homestead for a few more days until things cool down. Hope hesitated. I can't keep imposing on you, Yates, and delaying further will only raise more questions. I'm not concerned about imposition, Yates insisted. I'm concerned about your safety. Harlan has influence in this town, and if he's decided you're hiding something worth discovering, he won't let it go easily. They reached the stagecoach station, where several passengers were already waiting. The station manager informed them that the stage was running about 30 minutes behind schedule, but should arrive soon. Yates led Hope to a quiet corner of the waiting area. Hope, if there's anything you haven't told me, anything that might explain Harlan's interest, now would be a good time to share it. Hope met his gaze steadily, though he could see the internal struggle in her eyes. What I told you about the stagecoach robbery was true, she said finally. But it wasn't the whole truth. Yates waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. I didn't come west solely for the teaching position, Hope admitted. I'm also running from someone, a man named Richard Blackburn. He was my father's colleague at Harvard, and after my parents died, appointed himself my guardian of sorts, though I'm well past the age of needing one. What did he want from you? Yates asked, though he could guess the answer. Marriage, ostensibly, Hope said bitterly. But what he truly wanted was control of me, of my inheritance, of my every thought and action. When I refused his proposal for the third time, he became threatening, claimed I was mentally unstable, that my grief had affected my judgment. He nearly had me committed to an asylum. Yates felt a surge of anger on her behalf. So you fled? Hope nodded. I sold what jewelry I could without raising suspicion and purchased a ticket west under a slightly altered name. Hope Reeves instead of Hope Reynolds. Not very creative, but enough to slow him down if he tried to track me. And you think he might be looking for you? Yates asked. I know he is, Hope confirmed. He's a proud man with powerful connections. My rejection wounded his pride, and he's not the type to accept defeat graciously. Yates processed this new information. Do you think Harlan could be working for him? I don't see how, Hope said. Unless Richard somehow tracked me to this area and sent telegrams to local authorities. She paled at the thought. Is that possible? Possible, but not likely, Yates reassured her. More probable that Harlan is just being his usual unpleasant self, throwing around accusations to see what sticks. The sound of approaching hoofbeats and the rumble of wheels announced the stagecoach's arrival. Yates felt a tightening in his chest as the reality of Hope's imminent departure hit home. You don't have to get on that stage, he said impulsively. You could stay, at least until we're sure it's safe. Hope's eyes widened slightly. Stay? At your homestead, you mean? It's not much, Yates acknowledged, but no one would bother you there. And Silver Creek School does need a teacher. The children have been without proper education for nearly a year. You're suggesting I give up the position in Tucson? Hope asked, sounding both surprised and intrigued by the idea. I'm suggesting you consider your options, Yates clarified. Tucson will always need teachers, but right now, I'm not convinced it's safe for you to travel there alone, especially if someone is looking for you. Hope studied his face intently, as if searching for his true motivations. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her. I would need to send another telegram, she said slowly, to decline the Tucson position, at least for now. Yates felt a surge of relief, followed immediately by uncertainty. Was he being selfish, asking her to stay? Or was he genuinely concerned for her safety? Perhaps it was both. We can do that right now, he said, offering her his arm. As they turned to leave the station, they nearly collided with a well-dressed man who had just entered. Yates automatically steadied Hope with a hand at her elbow, then looked up to apologize to the stranger. The man was tall and distinguished, with silver-streaked dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. His expensive suit was dusty from travel but clearly of fine quality. When his eyes fell on Hope, they widened with recognition, then narrowed with an emotion Yates couldn't immediately identify. Hope, the man said, his cultured voice confirming Yates's suspicion that he was not a local. What an extraordinary coincidence. All color drained from Hope's face. Richard, she whispered. Yates felt her trembling beneath his touch and instinctively moved closer to her side. This, then, was Richard Blackburn, the man Hope had fled across the country to escape. I've been so worried about you, my dear, Blackburn said, his solicitous tone belied by the coldness in his eyes. Imagine my distress when I discovered you had left Boston without a word. It took considerable effort to trace your movements. How did you find me? Hope asked, her voice stronger than Yates would have expected given her obvious fear. A fortunate coincidence, Blackburn replied smoothly. I had traced you as far as the stagecoach office in Santa Fe when I learned of a robbery on the route to Tucson. A simple matter of deduction led me to inquire at the nearest settlements along that route. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And here you are. Yates didn't believe for a moment that the encounter was coincidental. More likely, Blackburn had been making inquiries in every town along the stagecoach route and had either gotten lucky in Silver Creek or had been tipped off possibly by Harlan. Hope's not going anywhere with you, Yates said firmly. Blackburn regarded him with the detached interest one might show an unusual insect. And you are, Yates Jameson, the man who found Hope after your friends abandoned her in the desert to die. My friends, Blackburn raised an eyebrow. I assure you, I had nothing to do with any stagecoach robbery. I'm simply here to escort my ward safely home." "I am not your ward," Hope stated clearly. "I am a grown woman of legal age, and I have no intention of returning to Boston with you or anyone else." "I'm afraid you're not thinking clearly, my dear," Blackburn said with patronizing concern. "The trauma of your parents' deaths, followed by this terrible ordeal in the wilderness. Anyone would be confused. Your doctor in Boston was quite specific about your need for supervision." "That doctor was your friend who never even examined me," Hope retorted. "You're manufacturing concerns about my mental state because you can't accept that I simply don't want to marry you." Blackburn's facade of concern slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of anger. "You're being irrational. This is exactly the sort of behavior that concerns your physicians." "She sounds perfectly rational to me," Yates interjected, "and she's made her wishes clear." By now, the other waiting passengers were watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. The stage-coach driver called for everyone to board, but no one moved, too engrossed in the drama unfolding before them. Blackburn seemed to become aware of their audience and modulated his tone accordingly. "Hope, please, let's not create a scene. Come back to the hotel with me and we can discuss this privately like civilized people." "There's nothing to discuss," Hope replied. "I've established a new life here. I'm not returning to Boston." Something dangerous flashed in Blackburn's eyes. "I see. And does your new life include this?" He glanced at Yates with thinly veiled disdain. "Cowboy, how quickly your standards have declined." Yates felt his temper rising but kept it in check. Getting into an altercation with Blackburn would only complicate the situation. Hope, however, had reached the limits of her patience. "My standards have improved considerably, Richard. I now value honesty, kindness, and respect over social position or academic credentials, qualities you've never demonstrated." "You will regret this insolence," Blackburn hissed, dropping all pretense of concern. "When I'm through, no school in this territory or any other will hire you. You'll be fortunate to find work as a laundress." "That's enough," Yates said, stepping forward. "Miss Reeves has made her decision. I suggest you board that stage and return to Boston." "And if I don't?" Blackburn challenged. "Will you shoot me, Cowboy? I understand that's how disputes are typically resolved in these barbaric territories." "No need for shooting," came a new voice. Sheriff Miller had entered the station, likely drawn by reports of the confrontation. "But I do insist on civility in my town." Blackburn turned his attention to the lawman. "Sheriff, I'm attempting to persuade my ward to return home where she belongs. This man is interfering." Miller looked from Blackburn to Hope, then to Yates. "Miss Reeves, are you this man's ward?" "No, Sheriff," Hope said firmly. "I am 24 years old and legally independent. Mr. Blackburn has no authority over me whatsoever." The sheriff nodded. "That's what I thought. Mr. Blackburn, unless you have legal papers proving otherwise, the lady is free to do as she pleases." Blackburn's face darkened with fury. "This is outrageous. I've traveled over 2,000 miles to find her." "And now you've found her," Miller replied matter-of-factly. "She's alive and well and making her own decisions. Stage is leaving in 5 minutes if you want to be on it." For a moment, it seemed Blackburn might continue to argue, but a lifetime of respecting authority apparently won out. "This isn't over," he said to Hope. "You're making a grave mistake." "The only mistake I made was not leaving Boston sooner," Hope replied with dignity. With a final glare at both Hope and Yates, Blackburn stalked out of the station. Whether he intended to board the stagecoach or remain in Silver Creek remained to be seen. "Thank you, Sheriff," Hope said once Blackburn had gone. Miller shrugged. "Just doing my job, madam. Though I'd advise you to be careful. Men like that don't take kindly to being refused." "We'll be careful," Yates assured him. As they left the station, Hope let out a shaky breath. I can't believe he tracked me here. What if he stays in Silver Creek? Then we deal with that problem when it arises, Yates said. But first, let's send that telegram to Tucson, and then we should talk to the school board here about their need for a teacher. Hope stopped walking and looked up at him with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. You really think I should stay, even with Richard here? Yates met her gaze steadily. I think you should do whatever makes you feel safe and happy, but yes, I'd like you to stay. The admission cost him something in vulnerability, but the smile that bloomed on Hope's face made it worthwhile. Then let's send that telegram, she said, slipping her hand into the crook of his arm. The Silver Creek School Board, consisting of the banker, the general store owner, and the widow who ran the hotel, were thrilled at the prospect of hiring a qualified teacher. They agreed to meet with Hope the following day to discuss terms, and to show her the small schoolhouse that had stood empty for months. As Yates and Hope rode back to his homestead that evening, there was a new awareness between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that her decision to stay had changed something fundamental in their relationship. You think Richard will leave on the next stage? Hope asked as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. Hard to say, Yates replied honestly. Men like that don't give up easily when their pride is involved. I'm afraid he'll cause trouble, Hope admitted. For me, for you, for anyone who helps me. Yates reached back to squeeze her hand where it rested at his waist. We'll face that together if it comes. Silver Creek isn't Boston. His influence is limited here. When they reached the homestead, Yates helped Hope dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. She looked up at him, her expression soft in the golden light of sunset. Thank you, she said simply, for giving me a choice, for making me feel that I had options. Everyone deserves choices, Yates replied, especially someone as remarkable as you. The compliment brought a flush to Hope's cheeks. You think I'm remarkable? I think you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met, Yates admitted. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. You amaze me, Hope. Something shifted in her expression of vulnerability mixed with determination. May I tell you something, Yates? Something I've been afraid to acknowledge even to myself. Yates nodded, his heart suddenly pounding. When you found me on that road, I thought I was dying. I was ready to give up. Hope's voice was soft but steady. But then I heard your voice, felt your strength, and something in me wanted to live again, not just survive, but truly live. Her words touched something deep within him. I know that feeling, he said quietly, of finding a reason to live when you thought all reasons were gone. Hope stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Is it too soon to say that I think I've found that reason in you? Instead of answering with words, Yates gently cupped her face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When Hope responded, her arms sliding around his neck, the kiss deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, Yates rested his forehead against hers. Not too soon, he murmured. Just right. That night, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars, their hands entwined, Yates felt a sense of rightness he had never experienced before. The future held uncertainties, Blackburn's threats, the challenges of building a life together in this harsh land, but for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward rather than dwelling on the past. What are you thinking? Hope asked, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. That sometimes the most unexpected turns in the trail lead to the best destinations, Yates replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Like finding a half-dead woman by the roadside, Hope teased gently. Exactly like that, Yates agreed with a smile, though I'm partial to how alive you are now. Hope's laughter, warm and genuine, floated on the night air, a sound Yates knew he would never tire of hearing. The following weeks brought significant changes to both their lives. Hope began teaching at the Silver Creek School, quickly winning over the town's children with her enthusiasm and innovative teaching methods. Parents who had initially been skeptical of the Boston lady were won over when they saw their children's excitement about learning. Yates found himself increasingly involved in community affairs, partly because of his association with Hope, but also because he was gradually opening himself to connections he had long avoided. He helped repair the schoolhouse roof, built proper desks for the students, and even offered the older boys lessons in basic ranching skills after school hours. Richard Blackburn had not departed on the next stagecoach as they'd hoped. Instead, he took a room at the hotel and made it known that he was considering investment opportunities in the area. It was a transparent excuse to remain close to Hope, but there was little they could do about his presence as long as he broke no laws. He made his hostility clear through small, calculated actions, spreading rumors about Hope's background, questioning her qualifications as a teacher, and attempting to turn the more conservative townspeople against her. But Hope's genuine warmth and dedication to her students proved stronger than his machinations. One evening, about a month after Hope had begun teaching, Yates returned from checking his herd to find her sitting on the porch of his cabin, their cabin now, in all but name, though she maintained a small room at the hotel for propriety's sake. "Busy day?" he asked, bending to kiss her upturned face. Hope hummed contentedly. "The children are preparing a presentation for the Harvest Festival next week. You should see little Emma Thompson reciting Longfellow. She has quite a dramatic flair." Yates smiled, enjoying Hope's obvious pleasure in her work. "I wouldn't miss it, though I suspect not everyone in town will be as appreciative." Hope's expression sobered. Richard was outside the schoolhouse again today, watching. He didn't approach or speak to anyone, just observed. "It's unnerving." Yates felt a surge of protectiveness. "Perhaps it's time we spoke to Sheriff Miller again. Blackburn's behavior is bordering on harassment." "What could the sheriff do?" Hope asked pragmatically. "Richard hasn't broken any laws, he's just existing in the same town, making his presence felt." "Still, I don't like it," Yates insisted. "A man doesn't linger for weeks in a place like Silver Creek without purpose." Hope nodded, acknowledging the validity of his concern. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment, "about asking the school board to make my position permanent. They seem pleased with my work so far, and it would establish my intent to remain here indefinitely." "You're certain that's what you want?" Yates asked carefully. "Silver Creek is a far cry from Boston or even Tucson." Hope's smile was radiant as she took his hand. "I've never been more certain of anything. My life is here now, with my students, with this community." Her voice softened. "With you." Yates brought her hand to his lips. "Then I have something to ask you," he said, his heart suddenly racing. "Something I've been thinking about for weeks." Hope's eyes widened as he knelt before her, still holding her hand in his. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a modest emerald that he'd purchased on a recent trip to the larger town of Prescott. "Hope Reeves," he said, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't offer you wealth or luxury, but I promise to spend every day making sure you never regret choosing this life, this place. Me." Tears welled in Hope's eyes, but her smile was luminous. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, Yates, yes." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been made for her. As Yates rose to take her in his arms, the setting sun bathed them in golden light, a blessing from the land that had brought them together. Their kiss was a sealing of promises, a commitment deeper than words could express. When they finally parted, Hope rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We should celebrate," she said. "Share our news with the town." "Tomorrow," Yates agreed. "Tonight I want you all to myself." They spent the evening planning their future, a simple wedding in the town church, expanding the cabin to accommodate a growing family someday, combining Hope's teaching with Yates's ranching to build a life of purpose and meaning. Neither mentioned Richard Blackburn, but his shadow hovered at the edges of their happiness, a reminder that not everyone wished them well. The next morning, they rode into town together, Hope proudly wearing her engagement ring. Their first stop was the schoolhouse, where Hope needed to prepare for the day's lessons. Yates walked her to the door, stealing a quick kiss before promising to return at noon to accompany her to lunch, where they planned to announce their engagement to her colleagues on the school board. "Be careful," he said, a habit born of persistent concern for her safety. "Send word if Blackburn shows his face." "I will," Hope assured him. "But don't worry. He's never approached me directly, and there will be children and parents around all morning." Still, as Yates rode toward the general store to purchase supplies, he couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Blackburn had been too quiet lately, too calculating in his observations. A man like that didn't simply accept defeat. His instincts proved correct. As he was loading his purchases onto his horse, Wade Harlan approached, a malicious gleam in his eye. "Jameson," he greeted. "Heard you're planning to make an honest woman of the school teacher." Yates stiffened. They hadn't told anyone their news yet. "News travels fast," he remarked noncommittally. Harlan's smile was unpleasant. "Small town. Saw the ring on her finger this morning. Pretty piece for a rancher's budget." "What do you want, Harlan?" Yates asked directly, in no mood for the man's games. "Just thought you might want to know your future wife's guardian paid me a visit last night." Harlan leaned against the hitching post, clearly enjoying Yates's attention. "Interesting fellow, Blackburn. Educated, wealthy, determined." "What did he want with you?" Yates demanded. "Information, mainly. About you. Your past. Seemed quite interested in your history before you became Silver Creek's upstanding citizen." A cold knot formed in Yates's stomach. His past wasn't a complete secret in the territory, but he'd never discussed the details with anyone in Silver Creek, not even Hope. "And what did you tell him?" Yates asked, keeping his voice level. Harlan shrugged. "That you rode with the Garrison gang for a while after the war. That there might still be a bounty or two on your head in New Mexico. Nothing he couldn't discover with a few telegrams." Yates controlled his anger with effort. "That was a long time ago, Harlan. I was a different man then." "Were you?" Harlan's eyes narrowed. "Men don't change their nature, Jameson. They just learn to hide it better. Blackburn seems to think the school teacher might be interested in knowing exactly who she's planning to marry." "Then let him tell her," Yates replied with more confidence than he felt. "I have no secrets from Hope." It wasn't entirely true. While he'd admitted to riding with a rough crowd after the war, he'd never shared the specifics: the robberies, the gunfights, the man he'd killed in a dispute over stolen gold. Not out of deception, but because he'd put that life firmly behind him and saw no purpose in dwelling on shameful details. "We'll see about that," Harlan said, pushing away from the hitching post. "Blackburn's a man who gets what he wants one way or another. Just thought you should be prepared." As Harlan walked away, Yates felt the carefully constructed peace of the past weeks beginning to crumble. Blackburn was escalating his tactics, moving from passive observation to active intervention. It was only a matter of time before he confronted Hope directly with whatever information he'd gathered. Yates mounted his horse and rode quickly toward the schoolhouse. He needed to speak with Hope before Blackburn did, to tell her everything about his past himself. The thought of her learning about his former life from a man who wished her harm was unbearable. But as he approached the schoolhouse, he saw a crowd gathered outside. Children stood in small groups, some crying, while parents spoke in hushed, concerned tones. Sheriff Miller was there, his expression grim. Yates dismounted hastily, pushing through the crowd. "What's happened? Where's Hope?" Miller turned to him with a look of regret. "Jameson, I was about to send someone to find you. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Yates demanded, fear clawing at his throat. "Where is she?" "She's alive," Miller assured him quickly. "But she's been hurt." Blackburn came to the school just after lessons began. Witnesses say they argued, and when she tried to make him leave, he became violent. Pushed her down the steps at the entrance. Rage and terror warred within Yates. "How badly is she hurt? Where is she now?" "Doc Simmons is with her at his office," Miller replied. "Said it looks like a broken arm and some bruises, nothing life-threatening." "And Blackburn?" Yates asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "In my jail cell," Miller said firmly. "And that's where he'll stay until the circuit judge arrives next week. I won't have violence against women in my town, no matter how distinguished the perpetrator." Yates nodded, momentarily relieved that the sheriff had acted decisively. "I need to see her." "Go on," Miller encouraged. "I'll handle things here." The doctor's office was a small building near the center of town. Yates entered to find Hope sitting on an examination table, her left arm splinted and bandaged, her face pale but composed. When she saw him, tears filled her eyes. "Yates," she whispered as he crossed the room in 3 long strides to gather her carefully in his arms. "I'm here," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry. I should have been with you." Hope pulled back slightly to look at his face. "You couldn't have known. None of us expected him to become violent." Dr. Simmons, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, cleared his throat. "The break is clean," he informed Yates. "It should heal well if she rests it properly. The bruises look worse than they are." Yates thanked the doctor, his eyes never leaving Hope's face. There was a darkening bruise on her cheekbone where she must have struck the ground in her fall. "What happened?" he asked gently once the doctor had given them privacy. "What made him snap?" Hope's free hand went to her engagement ring. "This. He saw it when I was writing on the blackboard, demanded to know what it meant. When I told him we were engaged, he became enraged. Said he wouldn't allow it, that I belonged to him." Yates clenched his jaw, fighting back another wave of fury. "No one will ever hurt you again," he promised. "I won't let them." "I know," Hope said, touching his face tenderly. "But Yates, there's something else. The things he said about you." So Blackburn had already begun his campaign to poison Hope against him. "Whatever he told you, I want to explain. You don't need to," Hope interrupted. "Not now, not like this. I know the man you are today. That's what matters to me." Her trust humbled him, but Yates knew she deserved the complete truth. "I want to tell you everything," he insisted. "About who I was before Silver Creek, about the things I did that I'm not proud of. You should know the man you're planning to marry, all of him, not just the parts that are easy to accept." Hope studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but not here. Let's go home." Home. The simple word held such meaning now, Doctor. Simmons provided a sling for Hope's arm and a bottle of laudanum for the pain, before releasing her into Yates's care. They rode back to the homestead slowly, Hope seated in front of Yates on the saddle where he could support her more easily. Once they were settled inside the cabin, Hope's arm properly elevated on a pillow as the doctor had instructed, Yates began his story. He spoke of returning from the war a changed man, angry and directionless. Of falling in with the Garrison gang. a group of former soldiers turned outlaws who preyed on stage coaches and small banks throughout the New Mexico territory. He told her about the robberies, about the rush of power he'd felt with a gun in his hand and fear in his victims' eyes. About the fateful day when a bank robbery went wrong, and in the chaos, he'd shot a man, a young teller who had reached for a weapon of his own. "I didn't mean to kill him," Yates said, his voice hollow with the memory. "But he died all the same. That was the moment I realized what I'd become, what the war and the bitterness had made me." Hope listened without interruption, her eyes steady on his face as he recounted his decision to leave the gang, the ambush that nearly killed him, and the long recovery that gave him time to reflect on the path his life had taken. "The man who found me, the Navajo healer, told me that a warrior who cannot find peace becomes a monster," Yates continued. "He said I had to choose which path to follow. It was the simplest and most profound truth I'd ever heard." "And you chose peace," Hope said softly. Yates nodded. "I tried. I've spent 8 years trying to atone for the man I was, building something honest, treating others with the respect I once denied them." He met her gaze directly. "But the past doesn't disappear, Hope. There may still be wanted posters with my face on them in parts of New Mexico. If my identity were confirmed, I could face prison. Or worse." He paused, gathering courage for the most difficult part. "I understand if this changes things between us. If you can't." Hope stopped him with a finger to his lips. "It changes nothing," she said firmly. "Do you think I haven't seen the goodness in you? The kindness you show to everyone, the way you've rebuilt your life through honest work and decency?" "But the man I was is not the man you are," Hope insisted. "We are all shaped by our choices, Yates. The choices that matter most are not the ones we made in our darkest moments, but the ones we make every day to be better, to do better." Yates felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, the burden of secrets kept too long. "You are an extraordinary woman, Hope Reeves." "Soon to be Hope Jameson," she reminded him with a smile. "If you still want me, knowing that marrying me seems to invite trouble." "I want you more with each passing day," Yates assured her. "Trouble and all." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Hope's injury required her to temporarily suspend teaching, but her students visited the cabin daily, bringing small gifts and handmade cards that soon covered the mantelpiece. The town rallied around them, outraged by Blackburn's attack on their beloved teacher and determined to see justice served. Richard Blackburn remained in the Silver Creek jail, his demands for release ignored by Sheriff Miller, who took a personal satisfaction in reminding the Boston academic that frontier justice operated by different rules than Eastern courts. The circuit judge was expected within days, and Miller was confident that Blackburn would face serious consequences for his assault on Hope. On a crisp autumn morning, Yates and Hope were enjoying a peaceful breakfast when the sound of approaching riders drew them to the porch. Sheriff Miller was riding toward the cabin, accompanied by a man Yates didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the unmistakable bearing of a lawman. "That's not the circuit judge," Hope observed. "He's not due until tomorrow." "No," Yates agreed, a sense of foreboding settling over him. "That's someone else." As the riders drew closer, Miller raised a hand in greeting. "Morning, Jameson, Miss Reeves. This here's Marshal Parker from the territorial office. He'd like a word." Yates nodded, maintaining an outward calm despite the sudden racing of his heart. "Marshal, what brings you to our doorstep?" Parker dismounted, studying Yates with the calculating gaze of a man who had spent decades observing human behavior. "Mr. Jameson, I'm here about a prisoner in Sheriff Miller's jail, Richard Blackburn. What about him?" Hope asked, stepping slightly closer to Yates. "He's been making some interesting claims," Parker said. About your fiancé's past activities in New Mexico territory, claims that, if true, would be of significant interest to my office. Yates met the marshal's gaze steadily. I imagine Mr. Blackburn would say anything to deflect attention from his own crimes. That may be so, Parker acknowledged, but it's my job to investigate all credible allegations. Blackburn's described your involvement with the Garrison gang in considerable detail. Details that aren't common knowledge. Hope's hand found Yates's, her fingers twining with his in silent support. That was a long time ago, Marshal, Yates said quietly. 8 years. I've built a different life since then. So you don't deny it, Parker pressed. Yates straightened his shoulders. No, sir. I don't deny that I rode with Garrison for a time after the war. I was young, angry, and made choices I've spent every day since regretting. Parker nodded, unsurprised by the admission. And the bank robbery in Cimarron, the teller who was killed. An accident, Yates said, the old guilt washing over him anew. I never intended to shoot him, but yes, I was there. I fired the shot. Hope's grip on his hand tightened, but she remained silent, letting him face this moment in his own way. I see, Parker said, his expression unreadable. You understand I have a duty to uphold the law, Mr. Jameson. There are outstanding warrants for every member of the Garrison gang. I understand, Yates replied, resigned to the inevitable. 8 years of honest living, of building redemption piece by piece, and now it would all end because of Richard Blackburn's vindictiveness. Fortunately for you, Parker continued, surprising him, those warrants have recently been rendered moot. What do you mean? Yates asked, hardly daring to hope. 2 months ago, we apprehended Caleb Garrison himself, Parker explained. In exchange for certain considerations regarding his sentence, he provided detailed testimony about every member of his gang and every crime they committed. I don't understand, Yates said. How does that help me? Garrison confirmed that you left the gang before the worst of their crimes. He also corroborated your account of the Cimarron incident, that the teller's death was unintentional and occurred during a chaotic situation that escalated beyond anyone's control. Yates felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Are you saying? I'm saying the territorial governor has issued conditional pardons for several former members of the gang who were deemed less culpable and who have demonstrated rehabilitation, Parker clarified. Your name is on that list, Mr. Jameson. Provided you continue to live as a law-abiding citizen, your slate is clean. Hope made a small sound of joy beside him, her free arm wrapping around his waist. I don't know what to say, Marshal, Yates managed, overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. You might thank whatever stars aligned to bring this about before Blackburn's allegations could do any real damage, Parker suggested dryly. The timing is remarkably convenient. Sheriff Miller, who had remained silent during the exchange, cleared his throat. What about Blackburn, Marshal? Will you be taking him into custody? That depends, Parker replied, looking at Hope. Miss Reeves, do you wish to press charges against him for the assault? Hope considered the question carefully. What would happen to him? Given his status and lack of prior offenses, likely a fine and perhaps a short jail sentence, Parker admitted. The territorial courts tend to be lenient in cases without severe injury, especially for first-time offenders. Hope exchanged a glance with Yates, a silent communication passing between them. I'll press charges, she decided. Not for vengeance, but because he needs to understand that his actions have consequences, regardless of his social position. Parker nodded approvingly. A wise perspective. I'll transport him to the territorial court in Prescott for arraignment. As the lawmen prepared to depart, Yates stepped forward to shake Parker's hand. Thank you, Marshal, for delivering this news in person, for giving me a chance to explain. "Second chances are rare, Mr. Jameson," Parker replied. "Make the most of yours." "I intend to," Yates assured him, his arm sliding around Hope's waist after the riders disappeared down the trail. Hope turned to Yates, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's over," she whispered. "Truly over. Your past, Richard's threats, all of it." "Thanks to you," Yates said, gathering her carefully in his arms, mindful of her injured arm. "You gave me the courage to face it all." "We gave each other courage," Hope corrected him. "That's what love does, I think. It makes us braver than we could ever be alone." Yates kissed her then, pouring all his gratitude, relief, and love into the gesture. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "What do you say we move up the wedding date? I'm tired of waiting to call you my wife." Hope's smile was radiant. "I thought you'd never ask." 2 weeks later, on a bright October morning, the small church in Silver Creek was filled to capacity as Yates and Hope exchanged their vows before the assembled townspeople. Hope had recovered enough to discard the sling, though she still wore a light splint beneath the lace of her wedding gown, a simple but elegant creation sewn by the women of the town as a wedding gift. Yates, dressed in a new suit that felt stiff and unfamiliar compared to his usual ranch clothes, found himself unexpectedly moved by the ceremony. The words they spoke were traditional, but the sentiment behind them was profound, a promise to face whatever life brought them together, with courage and love. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. Hope's students rushed forward, presenting her with a bouquet of wildflowers they had gathered that morning. Even Sheriff Miller appeared uncharacteristically emotional, surreptitiously wiping his eyes during the exchange of rings. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned with food contributed by every family in Silver Creek. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears, all the elements of a proper community celebration. As evening approached, Yates found a moment alone with his new wife on the porch outside the hall. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a fitting conclusion to a perfect day. "Happy, Mrs. Jameson?" he asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. "Deliriously," Hope replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I suspect your cattle are wondering what's become of their caretaker." Yates chuckled. "They'll survive another day without me. I have more important matters to attend to." "Such as?" Hope asked innocently, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Taking my wife home," Yates murmured, bending to kiss her, "beginning our life together properly." Hope's expression softened. "Home, it's a beautiful word, isn't it? Even more beautiful now that it means you." As they rode back to the homestead in the gathering twilight, Hope seated before him on thunder as she had been the first day he found her. Yates reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A random choice to take the Eastern Trail that day, a woman collapsed by the roadside, a whispered assurance that she'd made it far enough, all leading to a future brighter than he had ever dared to imagine. "What are you thinking about?" Hope asked, tilting her head back to see his face. "About fate," Yates replied. "About how sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to the best ones. If you hadn't been running from Blackburn, if I hadn't found you on that trail." "We found each other," Hope said simply, "and now we've found home." As their homestead came into view, warm light spilling from the windows where neighbors had prepared the cabin for their return, Yates knew with absolute certainty that he had indeed found home, not just in this place, but in the remarkable woman who had chosen to share her life with his. "Welcome home, Hope Jameson," he whispered, echoing the words he'd spoken when she was a stranger in need of shelter. But now they carried a deeper meaning, a promise of love, protection, and partnership that would endure through whatever challenges lay ahead. Hope turned in the saddle to meet his gaze, her eyes reflecting the first stars appearing in the evening sky. "I've made it far enough," she said, recalling his words from their first meeting. "And now we'll go the rest of the way together."